Hello, everyone. Welcome to our 9th CTF walkthrough. These walkthroughs are part of our Aspire program, and these are the walkthroughs to all the challenges we had previously. So if you missed any of our previous challenges, they are on our YouTube channel. That's the ICRA YouTube channel. So you can view them there. If you would like notifications, subscribe, and you will be notified of our future sessions as we still have another session to go. My name is CK. I lead the Aspire program, which is the mentorship program. And I'm going to be joined by Koske, who is part of a team who were involved in the creation of the challenges for this CTF. So they usually have a CyberRange or a CTF platform where they usually have a simulated environment. So we used logs from their simulated environment. For today, we are going to have two parts of our walkthroughs. One is going to focus on how to use Splunk and how to work with Zik logs. And a second one is going to focus on how to identify and analyze some malware traffic, and specifically one called Cobalt Strike. Other events that we'll be having in the near future is we'll be launching a CTF in conjunction with the SheHacks team. So tune in to their channel tomorrow and you will get notification and the details. ICRA is also hosting a Cybersecurity Awareness Month. October is the Global Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and we also have our own activities around that. And the Aspire team is also going to be involved next week. So without further ado, I think we can start the session, and we are going to start with Koske, and he's going to take us through the Zik challenges. And for instances where there is an alternative solution to what he gives, I'll also provide an alternative solution. So welcome, Koske, and go ahead.
Thank you so much, CK. My name is Michael Koske. I work with the Delta team, doing network security monitoring for the team and also creating these kind of challenges for us. We'll mainly be focusing on network security monitoring, as the challenge is all about that, which is the collection, detection, and analysis of network security data, and also look at Splunk and how we can be able to leverage it for such kind of analysis. We'll look at some of the search filters that we can be able to use to perform quick queries and analysis of the said challenges. So without much further ado, I'll just share the screen and then we can just go through the walkthrough as per the CTF. So I hope everyone can see the shared screen. Just a quick confirmation.
Yes, we can.
Okay, so we'll go straight to the questions, and then I have the two tabs, which is the CipherCode CTF platform and then the Splunk instance. So the first question is all about can you Zik and attacker. So it asks an attacker scanned for open ports on the DMZ host. We've been given the DMZ host. What is the IP address of the attacker? So this we can easily tell that maybe this DMZ host is the victim machine, and that will be our key starting point, and we can use that as a key starting point to be able to identify who the attacker is. We'll look at the communications, and Here on the Splunk instance, I already have done a search as was required here on the search box with index.sny and all time the query itself. And now we're just going to focus on the host, on the attacking machine itself. So we'll look at which is the host machine, given the victim machine, which is, I'll just try and paste the query for the one that I know is for the victim machine. So that is the IP address of the victim machine. And if we search with that, we can be able to now reduce the events to 1,188 events. And now we can be able to now look at the originating IP. This is the responding host. And if we look at from which origin was it responding to, you can see we have the ton.200.200.3. So looking at that, we can easily correlate and say that this take this as the external IP, because we know this is not an IP address of the DMZ host. So this is an external IP, and it could be the IP address of the attacker. So as is part of the CTF challenges, you can try and see if that is the answer. And yes, we get that as the answer for the first challenge, which is the attacker machine. So now we have two confirmation. We have the IP address of the victim and that of the attacker. So I can let, I don't know, CK, you have a different way of doing this?
My solution was also similar, so I think we can proceed.
Okay. So the challenges were as per points. So I'll just look for the second challenge. So here we have the second challenge. Can you seek open ports? And on this, an attacker scanned for open ports in the DMZ host, the same host, which is the victim machine. What ports were found to be open? So for my solution, since we are looking for the open ports, and for any ports to respond as open, it needs to kind of have the three-way handshake complete. So for me, for how I would go about this is to look for responding bytes, the IP, the ports that had a responding bytes. So if I look at responding bytes, I can just pick the 0, 1 and then filter it out, because I want anything that is not 0. Anything that responded with anything else apart from 0. So if I query with that, I'm able to get 29 events, and I can now go to the responding ports and see which ports responded. So here I have port 10,022, port 80, and port 0, which is an invalid port in this sense, in the TCP/IP stack. So I'm only left with port 22, 80, and 10,000. The question asks, list them in ascending order. So it's 22, 80, and 10,000. Yeah, CK. CK, do you have any alternate way of doing this?
Yeah, mine was a bit different. So I think what I'll do is I'll paste my search query in the chat. Then you can paste it in your search box. Then I can explain how mine was a bit different, but it's almost the same. No. So I've pasted mine in the chat, so you can use that.
Okay, let me pick CK's query. Okay.
Okay. So let me explain. Mine is almost very similar, but I used the connection state equals to RSTO. So RSTO usually means there was a reset. So someone tried to connect to a port, but the connection wasn't complete. So this is usually how scans are done. It's usually someone sends SYN requests, but never waits for the reply to complete the handshake. So that's usually some way you can also detect what a scanner may be doing. And I set the origin IP as the one we already identified as the attacker. The stats filter there is just to narrow down the ports. So it's the same way Koske did it. He did it in a graphical way, but Splunk also allows you to state the query. So in this case, I'm counting all the response ports that matched this filter. So yeah, that's it. You can go ahead.
Okay. So if we let me look for the third. So the third one is asking about the scanner. What is the user agent of the tool used by the attacker to perform the scan? For this, let me just get back to the query that I had initially. So, sorry. So for this, for me, given that I already identified the let's say the port that was being scanned on the previous question, I sometimes I just like to build it up on like that. So we have, let's say, take for example the IP, the port 10,000. Looking through that, I just go and search for the user agent that was used, because at least for this one, I understand that it is what was being scanned as part of the number 2 question. And looking at that, we have you can even see the URI, which is the nmap folder check, and then the user agent is Mozilla compatible nmap. Let me just try and see if it will accept that. And so, oh, sorry about that. There's something missing.
Check whether there is a space at the start.
Yeah, okay, there is. So, yeah, apologies about that. Sometimes, even as much as we do these things, we still fail at when it's really needed. So yeah, that is the way I went about it, just from knowing already the ports that were being scanned, using that as a foothold to understand what was the scanner that was being used. Okay.
All right, let me paste mine in the chat. So you can also use that there.
Okay, so
So in my case, we already know who the victim was, which is the id.response host. We know the origin host is the attacker, which is the 10.200.200.3. User agents are most commonly used using get parameters. Get parameters is a method in HTTP where a client queries a server. So if you want to get user agents, we can narrow down the search to those methods. Then we can try to see how many user agents were involved. In our case, it was only one. That's what I have done by the stats count by user agent. It's just a filtering for unique user agents. And that narrowed it to this one. And it's rather obvious from the name that it was the user agent that was involved in the scanning. So let's go on.
Okay. We go to number 4. It asks what SSH client was used by the attacker to access the compromised DMZ server. So we know we are looking for the SSH client. So having known the victim machine and the attacker IP address, you can just focus on the port itself. And okay, so there's, let me just use this one. You can also see that it refuses some unbalanced quotation. For the one that CK had pasted, it did not have some quotation on some part, but it depends with how sensitive the Splunk queries are. So let me try this.
There's a quote that looks different. The one before
ID.
that one, yeah.
This one.
I think that's the one that missing the query.
Okay. So, okay, thanks for that attention to detail. So, so for this, I was just focused on the port 22. These are just some of the connections that were meant to it. But down here, we can see the authorized attempt and the client itself. So we can see that we have the SSH, Open SSH 8.4, Debian 5, and that becomes the client that was used to access the SSH. So let me try and paste it. Yes, and that becomes the how go around tackling that. CK. CK, did you have a different method for this?
So for mine, it was very similar to yours. What I just did is I added a filter at the end. So you can actually add it to yours, add the pipe, then starts count by client.
After the
on the same
IP.
one you've used.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. No, at the end there.
At the end.
So add the pipe character.
So like that starts
count. Then starts count by client, because just wanted to filter what the SSH client was.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's very similar. It's just isolating the client and quickly finding it. Yeah, so very similar. So I think we can go ahead.
Okay. So, number 5, it asks what time did the attacker gain SSH access to the DMZ host, GMT. Flag is set to that. So for this, having known the port itself, the attacker, and the victim machine, I was just looking for So I was just looking for anywhere where there's authorization success is equals to true. You'll get that error. So where authorization access is equals to true, and our number of events, so 6 events in total. Well, how I'll go about this is to look for the very first event that occurred, and that becomes the time that they had access to the DMZ host. So the very first access authorized. So authorized success is equals to true, and this is the time that the timestamp of when this happened. So let me just try and set up the format as CK mentions if he had a different way of doing this. CK?
So my method was a bit different. And let me paste my solution in the chat, then you can paste it. So it should be in the chat right now.
Yeah, it is.
So for my scenario, the thing I changed was, in your case, I think you've used the authorization is true.
Yeah.
So I think there may be some slight difference between the two answers, because the authorization equals true happens once everything has been confirmed. But in my case, I used the connection state. So the connection state S1, in Zeek, when you see a connection state S1, it means that a connection has been established successfully. So that's what I did. If you go up again to it, let's go up to the very first one.
No.
Then no, to the query.
Okay.
So then I piped that to the word reverse. By reverse, by default, Splunk usually gives you the most recent events. So I did reverse to see the earliest event. So when you type reverse, it now reorders them from the oldest to the new. So that means that the event I'm looking for is the very first one that I see here. So if you go to this first event, scroll down to this first event.
Okay, this one.
This one,
Yeah.
there is a TS value that you can see there.
Yeah.
So this TS value then is what I used for the answer. I think it's already formatted in that format that they want, that was being asked up to there. Yeah, so the point to note here was the connection state. I think the question was the first point at which a connection was successfully established.
Okay. Is there something that I'm missing
Let's
there?
see.
30244.
000244. Let's go back to Splunk and confirm.
Okay.
Yeah, S1 means connection was successfully established. So I think I'll have to confirm whether the flag has an error somewhere, but there are several ways you can confirm this. All right, I think we can proceed to the other one. I think we'll come back to this at the end. I'll check in the back end whether there is some issue.
Okay. So number 6 asks, can you use pivot? So the compromised DMZ host has a second NIC with the IP 10.10.10.44. This helped the attacker access her host on the LAN. What host was accessed? So we know the first IP address of the victim machine was 172.16.30.66. So this is the second NIC, which allowed the user to pivot. So for me, what I did was just to check that is the IP address of the origin host. So let me just paste the query. So that is the query of the origin host, and then the response host. We have two response hosts here. 10.10.1 from the networking concepts, we could pick this as the IP address of the firewall. And then so I'm left with just one other IP address, which is 10.10.46, which is also on the same subnet as the 10.10.44. So it's on the same subnet, and this is what I will pick as the let's say the new victim machine, or the host that was compromised after the pivoting was done. So that, okay. CK, you had a different way of doing this?
I've pasted mine in the chat. All right. So in my case, we already know that we've been told as per the question that the attacker used the 10.10.10.44 as the pivot point. So that's our origin host. So I filtered out all the hosts that this machine connected to, that's using the stats count by, and all the ports that they connected to. So this narrowed it down to what you can see there. So it was 10.10.10.46 and 10.10.10.1. For the 10.10.10.1, we can see the only ports are 67 and 53, which are most usually used for normal administrative purposes. That's DNS, DHCP, and so on and so forth. But for the 10.10.10.46, we can see the 3389 port, which is an RDP port, and the port 22, which is an SSH port. So therefore, that was our the machine that was attacked, because these are now actual services that can be used to access another machine remotely.
Okay, thank you for that, if we go to the next question, which is 7, the pivot port. So the DMZ host has a second NIC, as we've seen on the previous question. This helps the attacker access a host on the LAN, which port was used to access that. So went about this again for myself. Sorry. So if I look at this is okay. Sorry about this. I think the query that I have is an issue. However, let me just try to rewrite this different. So I'll put this to be 6. And then I'm looking for an initialized a kind of connection that allows me to have it as communicating with the other IP address. So apologies for that. Let me see. CK, can you take this first as I look at the issue with my query? Hello, CK.
I used the same query I used for the previous question, so you can paste the same query. So again, in my situation, I did a reverse at the end to see the initial port that the 10.10.10.44 used to connect to the 10.10.46. And as you can see, that's the port 3389. So it was the same query as before, but the difference is what I'm looking for now is the port instead of the IP. So previous one, I figured it was 10.10.46. And from here now we can tell that it used the port 3389 to connect to that host initially. So the answer in this case would have been 3389, which is a common RDP port. RDP stands for remote desktop, for those who may be wondering.
Okay. Yeah, so I think that helps to kind of explain that better. I think now we kind of appreciate the way this thing is moving along, because once you get an answer to the previous, then it helps you even better understand what is happening on the next question. So let me just input that here. So, and also having that attacker mindset of knowing maybe which ports are being used for what purposes is also essential in terms of identifying, in terms of being able to identify the attacker mentality, or what be the ideal solution to a given challenge. So that was number 7. Number 8, the attacker used PowerShell Empire to compromise a host on the LAN. What is the name of the malicious file used to launch the PowerShell Empire agent? So for me on number 8, if I just go to Splunk and the query, if we look at the query itself, and we're just looking at the responding host and what it was communicating to, and what would be what was happening. So we can see here the host, and the originating host is at the .46 IP address. And then we can see the get method and the referrer here, which is the IP, which is part of the DMZ host, the second NICAD, and the port itself. And looking through the log itself, we see that there's a launcher.bat. Again, as I said, the attacker mentality is sometimes key in terms of identifying malicious activity within the network. For those who have interacted with, let's say, PowerShell Empire or things like that, you get to understand you get to understand things like launcher.bat as a stager that is used to that is used for staging the malicious file. So looking at PowerShell Empire and being asked about the malicious file, then we can just use that as a possible answer to the question. So let me just paste and see. So that's how I would have solved the challenge. Maybe CK a different way.
So I've pasted mine on the chat.
Okay, so let me just paste CK's solution.
So in my case, we already know the machine that was used to pivot, and we know the machine that was attacked using the pivot. So all I did is I filtered all the file paths that were shared between the two of them. The URI usually means the path. It's a section of the URL that often defines the path. And in our case, how PowerShell agents are usually launched is someone hosts the file on, let's say, a web server. Then by hosting that file, then they use the other host as the client to access that file. So by filtering all the possible file paths that were accessed, then I was able to identify the launcher.bat file as the file name of what was used.
Okay, yeah, see, CKJ is using the stats by count. So if we go to number 9, we have the attacker used PowerShell Empire to compromise a host on the LAN. What was the user agent used by the PowerShell Empire agent? So again, on the Splunk query. So let me just pick my query. Sorry. So this is the query that I use. This is the new victim machine, and this is still the attacker machine. Is using a pivot DMZ host to gain access to this. but the connection is still going back to him at as the attacker. So the question asks about the user agent. You can just come here and filter. We just have one user agent, which is the Mozilla 5.0 Windows NT, the WoW 64, and like Gecko. So this is the user agent that was used, and this could be the answer that is for the question. So I don't know. CK, as I answer this, do you have another way of doing this?
So I'll also paste mine. So there's mine in the chat. You can also type it there. So in my case, we already know, again, we know the machine that was attacked, from what machine this was done, the pivot point, and we've already identified the file from the previous question, that the file used was the launcher.bat. So after that, it's just filtering what user agent was involved. And there it is, which is the similar answer to what Koske has just shown.
So if we go to the next challenge, just the attacker used PowerShell Empire to compromise host on the LAN. Again, so what is the full URL of the PowerShell Empire agent used to call back to when requesting new tasks? So this is a CNC beaconing and asking for new tasks. So we'll just try and see what are the URLs. So let me just copy my query. So based on this query that I have, so again, we know this is the attacker machine and this is the victim machine. And I can come to the URI. So this, for me, this is how I'll get the three queries that are requested. So the flag format is Aspire, the URL1, URL2, and any other if you have. So they've asked what are the full URL to the PowerShell Empire agent, and those will be the full URL based on what was required. Yes, CK, any other way or any other answer to that?
Okay, so I can check the chat. There's that first query. Yeah. I used 2 queries, so can start with that first one.
Okay.
So again, we are building up from what we already know from the previous questions and from what we've already discovered. We already know that the attacked host was the 10.10.46. We already discovered that the user agent was that from the previous questions. So what I did is I now filtered by what was the host that was responding to this. Again, remember that the victim now is acting as a client and the attacker has hosted the PowerShell C2, the Empire C2 as a server. So in our case, this is the server. That's why I'm filtering by the responding host and the URI. The URI, as I said, is most likely going to be the file path. So by this, I can now get an idea of what the PowerShell C2 IP is. As you can see, it's the 10.200.200.3, and the URI paths is this. But I also wanted to filter out this to what happened first, or what URL was used first. So let me paste the next query that I used to filter this further. So by that, I've already narrowed it down. So you can paste this to Koske. 1 second. Let me copy my query. You should have it now.
Yes.
So again, you'll see it's a very similar query to the previous one, but there are a few changes here and there. So one of the changes is I've reversed the queries to start from the oldest to the newest, because the flag is asking you to list the URLs. So this helps you to list them from the earliest to the latest. So then again, this time I didn't use the stats count by. You can also create a table. So this doesn't try to group them. It lists them as they happened. So from this, I can see that the very first one was from this C2 IP and this path, which was the admin get.php. The next other unique one was the news.php. And the third one was the login and then process.php. So those are the 3 URLs. So the URL is the combination of the IP and the path. So it's just listing them in order from the earliest to the oldest, separated by commas as was asked in the flag. Then you would have your answer.
So we'll go to number 11. The attacker is PowerShell Empire to compromise a host on the LAN. Which 2 hosts on the LAN were compromised using the PowerShell Empire agent? So again, how I went about this, my solution would be this query. So it says PowerShell Empire was used to compromise, and based on the previous questions, the attacker machine that was using the PowerShell Empire to compromise was the 10.10.3, and so that becomes response host. And then if we look at the origin host, we have the 172.16.20.2, which is also a host, let's say, for the firewall, and also the 20.2 is also part of the firewall. So the remaining IP addresses is 10.10.46 and 10.10.10.53. So that will be how go about answering that question.
So I've pasted mine in the chat.
Okay. Let me just copy it and paste it here.
So again, very similar. We already know the attacker machine. We already know that it was using this user agent as part of the PowerShell user agent. That's what the agent, so that's just to narrow it down. Then what I did is to filter by what were these IPs that were communicating with DC2. That's the id.origin host. So as they were acting as the clients. Then we already know that the LAN IP start with 10.10.10. From all the previous questions, we already know that's what the LAN IPs refer to. We had already been told that the 172 was the DMZ and so on and so forth. So that now narrows the two IPs to the 10.10.10.46 and the 10.10.10.53.
Okay. So let's move to question 12. Look for it. So we have the question 12. It's asked about what is the fully qualified domain name of the server 10.10.30.242. So just by going with that IP address 10.10.10.30.242. Could get the response of the query. So the dc2016.sunwide.com as the fully qualified domain name of that IP. CK? Okay, I've seen it.
Can check the chat. So in my case, what I did is we are being asked what is the FQDN name. So that's the fully qualified domain name. So we are looking for which domain name provides the answer 10.10.30.244. So that's what that answers curly braces means. So answers are usually, a machine may have more than one answer. So that's why it's not just answers equals to, it's the curly braces. So it's based on how the fields are structured based on the Zik logs. So I think what you realize that most of these things you get good at by interacting with these logs frequently. So in this case, I know if a machine answers that it has the IP 10.10.30.242, then if I figure out what query was being asked, then I have the domain name of that IP. So that's basically that query. And you have your answer there.
Okay. Okay, so that marks the end of the Zik challenges, and then we'll move to the Cobalt challenges. So I'll pause the share, and maybe CK can share. Then we from there.
All right. So I'm going to take you through the Cobalt challenges. So let me share my screen. So I hope everyone can see my desktop. So the very first one was called domain. And the question was, what is the domain name from which the initial infection file was downloaded from? And the flag format is Aspire / then the brackets, then domain in between. And we've been given a file there, and we've been given the the password to extract the whatever is in the zip file. So once you extract this, you get a pickup file. So one of the best ways to open pickup files is using Wireshark. It's an analysis tool. You can analyze saved or live traffic. So I have already extracted this and saved it. So I'm just going to open it in Wireshark. And once you open it in Wireshark, this is what you find. So let's go back to the question. The question is, what is the domain name from which the initial infection was done? So the good thing with Wireshark is you can use queries. So in this case, the query I used was http.request equals to 1. So in Wireshark, HTTP request means that a client requested for something from a domain, a server. Equals to 1 means it's the very first instance. So if we use this in Wireshark, it very quickly filters this for us. And from there on, we can now go to the drop-down, and we've been asked for the domain name. So we should find it somewhere in this list. And if we go to the host, we have this here. We can find it both from the host, and we can also find it from the pull request. So that gives us the answer, the flag to our first question. So Cobalt 2, let's look for where this is. Asked for the payload. What is the name of the infected DLL that was downloaded? Again, very, very similar thought process. We already have this here. And since we've already done the hard work, we'll still use the same query. And once we use the same query, we'll just need to come and search for the DLL. So I have the prepared queries here. So you should come and find it here. Same as I said, the same query. So it's the same one. And once you come to this, you'll find the name of the file here. So again, you can still see this in the live Wireshark capture. The file name is this here. And it should give you the file type here. This is the user agent. Let's see. So anyway, you can always, in Linux, the good thing, you can always figure out whether a file type is what it says it is by running the file command. So if I run the file command on this, we'll see it's just pretending to be a .gif file, while in essence, it's a DLL. It's a tactic normally used by attackers to try and fool either system administrators or security tools that check the name instead of going deeper into the file. So I think we can go into number 3. The number 3 was called compromised. What is the host name of the infected host? Again, I already have some prepared queries. The good thing, again, it's all about Wireshark. So I'm going to introduce a new query that network defenders can use while trying to identify Cobalt strike traffic. I'm going to explain this query, but first let's just go and paste it before I explain what the query does. So Cobalt strike C2s usually use a certain structure in their URLs. So they usually have the URL. So we are looking for a URL that matches this path, a full URL that matches this path. And what we are looking for is this specific part here. It ends with 4 alphanumeric characters. So these dots here specify that we are looking for 4 alphanumeric characters, and this sign here usually signifies that's what it ends with. So we don't care what it starts with, we just want it to end with a slash and 4 alphanumeric characters. And we can see this is what we have here. So this is a pattern used by Cobalt Strike C2 servers and also Metasploit C2 servers. So it's a lazy way that you can identify a lot of malicious C2 servers. So, and from there we can filter this and immediately figure out what the name was. I think we were asked what was the exact question, what is the host name? And we can see we already have the host name either from the source, which is desktops, something, something, something. And we should also be able to filter it out from this. So let's see, under the IPv4, we should have it also here under the source address here. So you have the host name here. So the next question was the C2 name. What is the domain name of the Cobalt C2 server? So again, we already have the same query. So now what we need to find out is the C2 server, which is the destination. So in this case, again, it's plain read this, which is also pretty easy to figure out either from both here, or you can drill down into the destination address here and also find out what the domain of the C2 server was, as is shown here. So I think we've covered those two. So we've covered both 3 and we've covered 4, which we use the same query. So the 5th one was spawn. So for spawn, what it asked for was, so we can even go to the live site, is number 5, spawn. What is the name of the executable that the listener session was spawned to? So for this challenge, what we first needed to do was extract whatever files were communicated between the C2 and the victim. So on Wireshark, there's usually a way you can do this. You can go to File, Export Objects. In our case, it's HTTP traffic, as you can see from this. So if you go Export Objects, you can choose HTTP, then say Save All, and say where we want to save them. For my case, I've already saved them in this folder called Exports. So I'm not going to do it again. So that's how you export all the files that were involved in this communication. Because as per the question, we know that the executable that the listener was spawned to will most likely be something that was configured in the malicious PowerShell Cobalt Strike agent. For Cobalt Strike, it's called a beacon. For PowerShell, it's called an agent, but it's usually something very similar. It's the malicious file that was pushed to the victim. So for this, there is usually a very, very useful blog by someone from SANS. I have a link to it. So I would encourage everyone to go read this guy's blog. He's called Didier Stevens, and he has created a Python file that you can use to analyze malicious Cobalt Strike files. So in this case, we have the payload here. And using this Python script, you can use this to analyze the payload and figure out what configurations were made because when setting up a Cobalt Strike agent, there are server settings you configure. So on the C2, you configure various settings. You can configure what you want to infect. That means, is there a specific process you want to inject it into? Is there a sleep time? And so on and so forth. So I already have all this prepared. So I'm just going to go and run this. Of course, you can try and do this manually, but it would be some painstaking work. So what this does is it figures out if this payload has some form of encoding. In this case, they are using an XOR key. So it will do all this for you. It will tell you what type of payload it was, the sleep time, what port was targeted, and so on and so forth. There's jitter, there's the public key. As you can see, we can even start seeing all these. This is the C2 server, and so on and so forth. So the question specifically was what executable the listener was pointing to. So we can look for that, and we can see that the executable that it was pointed to is this run32, then run-dll 32.exe. So that was the solution. So most of this is based on experience and research, because doing this manually would probably still be possible, but take you a long time. For the jitter, we were given a second pickup, and this was the pickup. It was an NSM2. It's the same one here. And the question was, what was the jitter of the beacon set to? So, excuse me. So again, the same guy has a different file that he has created to analyze HTTP traffic, doing the same very similar things to the previous one. The difference between these two is that the previous script works on the payload. The second script works on the actual pickup. So again, you can check out this script, and you can check out his blog. He also blogs on the Sun's. I don't remember the full name, but if you follow his blog, you'll find out his Sun's blog. There's a blog he blogs on that he also breaks down how all this works. So we'll use his script. I already have this downloaded already. So it analyzes a pickup, and it will break down the details for you. So we have all the breakdowns, and the question was the jitter. So if we scroll down, we'll see that this does give us this exact value that we are looking for, which should be what was asked in the question, which was the 90. So the second one was the Cobalt Strike agent was sent a port scanner command by the C2. What hosts were discovered after the scan, list them in order of discovery, and we've been given the flag format. Again, still same scenario. So I've already run the command, but we are going to look for where the port scan command was run. So if we scroll down, we are looking for a command that was sent called port scan, and you can see it there. So as per the question is what hosts were discovered, list them in order of discovery. So this should also give us which hosts responded. So as we can see, we have the first one here. This one is the one that was first discovered. It responded saying it's alive. It's the same here, same one here. So that should be our first one. We scroll down, we have a second one here that responded and saying it was alive. And we have a third one here at respond saying it was alive. And I think we should have another one here. Yep, we do have another one here. And let's see if we have another one. Nope. We can see that it now says that the scanner module was complete. So again, this script just analyzed the pickup capture. So monitoring your network traffic is usually one of the best ways to track an incident and gain visibility into what is happening in your network, both from defensive, preventive, and a forensic perspective. So that should have given us our answer. So the only thing to do was to group them in the order they were discovered from top to bottom. That and final one was the elevate question. And the question was, the beacon received a bypass UAC command from the C2 server. Where was the malicious DLL file first written to enable this attack? We've been given the flag format. So again, still use the same Python script to pass this traffic and break down and analyze the Cobalt strike activity. And we'll go down and look for the bypass UAC command. So let's see if we can find it. Should be somewhere, command, yeah. So this is the command that was issued to the Cobalt strike beacon. And we can see that it wrote the DRL to this path. And that was the exact question that we were being asked here. So this isn't the only way to solve this. There are various ways. There are actual blogs that detail on how to identify Cobalt strike traffic. I think I should have a couple of them. I hope I have. This just describes what Cobalt strike beacons are if you want to read into the background information. So I would say if you want to learn about Cobalt strike, set up a lab, experiment with Cobalt strike, know what settings are usually set, and so on and so forth. Then study how to discover Cobalt strike traffic. There are a lot of people who have done these studies. Then just by searching detect Cobalt strike beacon, you'll see a lot of people who have various ways to do this. So the way we've done it is in the only way. It's a lot easier, but for a breakdown on the actual write-ups, there are a lot of people who have written down blogs that take you through the full process. If you search for, I think the Sun's blog I was talking about, let's see if I can find it here. So I think if you follow this, you should be able to also have guides on how to do this. So there are a lot of resources. Most of this is usually based around research. So I hope you are able to learn a thing or two about network security monitoring and how you can use it in your environments and in your studies if you are an aspiring SOC analyst, a threat hunter, a forensics analyst. So it's all about understanding your network, and network monitoring is usually one of the best ways to do this. So with that, I think we come to the end of our session. And I hope you all enjoyed the session. Thank you for hanging around. If you have any questions, both currently and in future, you can refer to us and we will respond to you. So use our WhatsApp channels, our Twitter account, and you can ask any questions and we would be willing to highlight them and explore them even in future. So thank you, everyone, and see you for our next walkthrough. Anyone before we go who has a burning question? I'm on the chat trying to see.
Yeah, CK, Mercy had a question.
Let me see.
The chat, yeah. How you got to identify the DLL used?
How he got to identify the DLL used? How did he know it was the one with the .gif extension? So I think let's go back to the Wireshark capture. So I hope you understood this part about the payload and how we used this filter to identify Cobalt Strike traffic. So once you get this, the best thing would be to export all the files that are involved in this communication. So you would come to export, to file export objects, then export all HTTP objects, which I have already done. So I have them in this folder. So I have these files here. So the next thing now would be to figure out what types of files they are. And on Linux, the easiest ways is to use the file command to identify the files. So if you identify that one, it's data. If you look for this, it's the DLL. So that's how you identify what type of file it is. There are ways you can automate this, but this is just the manual method. So I hope that one answers that. I think I stopped sharing the screen. Let me share it again. All right. Okay. So we are back to Wireshark. So I hope everyone understood how we were able to identify Cobalt Strike traffic by identifying a common structure used by Cobalt Strike beacons. So most of them, the C2 usually has the payload hosted with 4 alphanumeric characters at the end of the URL. So in this case, it would be a slash and 4 alphanumeric characters at the end. It's not definite, but you can use it to quickly figure out this. And once you filter out this, the next thing would be come and export all the files that were involved in this communication, since we are looking for the DLL that was initially involved. So I would come to export objects, go to HTTP, then save all. I've already done this, and I already have them in a folder called exports. So these are the files that were saved from that communication. So on Linux, there's usually the file command that can help you identify what types of files they are. So in this case, I can try to go through them, identifying what types of files they are. Alternatively, you can even use things like VirusTotal, upload the files, and VirusTotal will tell you what types of files they are. Are they malicious? What involvement do they have in the infection process? So like this, that looks like data. By the time you get to the GIF, it clearly tells us that it was a DLL. And we know it has been involved in that Cobalt Strike traffic. You can automate this traffic. This is just a more manual method of doing this. So you could script this, but I think this helps explain the process. So go back to the chat. I hope that was answered. Someone is asking for the recording. Yes, it's on YouTube. So it's going to be there, and you can ask any questions and you can follow up even now or in future. For a 2-minute Q&A session. All right. Any other person with a question that is burning? You can also ask the questions in our YouTube comments, then we can even respond to them even in future. Or should you want a future session detailed in a certain section more in detail, we are also willing to do that. So, all right. Thank you, everyone, and hope to see you for our next session. I think next session will cover mobile security and reverse engineering as we approach the end of our walkthroughs. And again, we will be having new CTF challenges in conjunction with the SheHacks team. So look out for the announcement from their session tomorrow from 7 p.m. So goodbye and enjoy your evening.